Welcome to We Chat Divorce, hosted by Karen Shalou, Legal Liaison, and Katherine Shanahan, CDFA. Each episode, we sit down with divorce professionals and industry experts to provide insights and frank discussions about real people, real situations, and real divorce to help you achieve your best life post-divorce. This episode of We Chat Divorce is brought to you by My Divorce Solution, offering divorce financial planning so clients can secure the divorce settlement they deserve. Visit mydivorcesolution.com to request access.
In this episode, we walk through 7 popular divorce tips and share which ones we agree with and which ones might cost you more than you think. If you're in the early stages, this is a must listen before you make any big moves. Welcome to We Chat Divorce, brought to you by My Divorce Solution and hosted by myself, Karen Shalou, Legal Liaison, and Katherine Shanahan, Divorce Financial Specialist and CDFA. On these special explainer videos, we answer the top questions about divorce, giving you confidence and clarity. We often run across articles that spark a need that we really feel would be helpful to our audience to elaborate on.
So today we're going to unpack an article that MSN and Money Talks News recently published, and it's titled 7 Things to Do ASAP When Your Spouse Wants a Divorce. So let's get started.
So we'll start off with how the article presents itself. And it says, when your spouse asks you for a divorce, there's things you should do immediately to protect your personal and financial interests. It's difficult to focus on money. We all know when your marriage is ending, and yet it's up to you to make sure you reach a fair and equitable divorce settlement. You wouldn't end a business partnership without first determining that all assets were divided fairly, and that same holds true for dissolving a marriage. Focus on the following things, and they name 7 things immediately if you learn that your spouse is planning to end your union. And this is what we want to talk about today. And it's exactly why we created the MDS financial portrait. So let's dig a little deeper into the article. So the article states that the number one thing you want to do first and foremost is hire a good attorney. We often have a different opinion.
It's not that we don't think that you should hire an attorney. It's just that, when's the time to hire an attorney? One thing, Karen, that gets me, and we see this in a lot of groups, is people asking for an attorney recommendation, and they're asking for a pit bull or an aggressive attorney. And so everyone chimes in saying you should go to my person or don't go to my person or whatever it is that they say. Or your best friend or your sister or sibling tells you where to go. But if you don't really know what you have and you don't really know what you want, how do you know what type of an attorney is good for you?
That's so true. And, Katherine, while we agree that attorney representation is a very important part of any divorce, we don't necessarily agree that it's step 1 or sometimes even 2. And so many people, when they engage our services, they immediately want to know, well, who should I hire as an attorney? But most of the time, unless someone's in harm's way, it can't be determined yet who you would want to hire, because you want to hire someone that's very specific to your marital estate, specific needs and the complexity that you may be facing.
And you don't even know if you have an opportunity to go to mediation or even collaborative law. If you just go hire a litigating attorney, give your spouse the opportunity maybe to work together a little bit, or at least work together to gather as much information as you can before going to file or before hiring an attorney, because an attorney can't do anything anyway until you file. So some people aren't ready. They want to work through some issues or they want to work through some things, so they say. So why not take that honeymoon period of the divorce process and gather as much information to avoid the cost of having to get this information through the court system?
Right. We often tell people that when you hire an attorney and file for divorce, you're immediately faced with court deadlines. And if you haven't done the good work of financial preparation, you can easily find yourself back on your heels, filling in documents that you're not really sure how to fill in. And, that divorce petition or divorce complaint is very offensive language and can start battles prematurely or inadvertently.
Right. And so I get that they're making this a number one, hire a good attorney. I get that they're saying that, but it doesn't mean that you have to hire one if you go consult with one. So if you're really nervous and you feel you need to go talk to an attorney, go ahead and get a consult. But actually hiring one right out of the gate might not be the first step that you have to take.
So true. And if you're getting the MDS portrait with my divorce solution, we're going to have specific questions to ask your attorney, very specific to your financials.
Good point.
All right. Number 2, monitor your credit reports. We agree that this is a really good step to take because so many people do not have a good grasp of what credit or loans or debts that they're attached to. So if you haven't run a credit report, it is a really good first step to establish a basis on the credit card accounts or the loan accounts that you own and those that you're just an authorized user, because so often in divorce, if you're just an authorized user, you can easily be cut off from access to those accounts and statements to those accounts.
It also identifies accounts that may have been opened in your name that you were unaware of. But if you're sitting there saying, oh, yes, I have a credit report because you know that your credit score is 700, a credit score is not a credit report.
Good point.
There are two different things. So, yes, you should get your credit report. It is an important document to look at. And guess what? It's free.
So true. And if you believe your spouse may be having an affair or another relationship, and you're an authorized user on that credit card account, you could easily find yourself with no access very quickly. We see that quite often. Number 3, close joint accounts. Catherine, what do you think about that?
I was actually shocked to see that. Where are you in the process? And how do you just go close joint accounts, not knowing what's happening, right? And it kind of contradicts one of their other things, like number 6 that we'll get to. If you want to keep things friendly, you're not going to run and close all joint accounts. Now, so it just depends on what's happening here. So before you run out to close any accounts, again, our portrait is really designed to help you understand, what is marital, what's not marital potentially. And actually, you need to know what's happening in your relationship. Are you using a joint account to pay some bills? Or is it because a lot of times people deposit into a savings account and then they transfer a certain amount to a checking account to pay the monthly bills? Maybe you can work through some things, but if you go close a joint account, then you're really going to piss off your spouse. And that's not going to help in any other further negotiations, or it might just backfire on you because maybe you're just going to cut off something that you were entitled to, or any other kind of negotiations that we're making. I just don't think you run and close joint accounts.
Yeah, be careful in anything in that space because, it could create a whole avalanche of responsive financial decisions made by your spouse that it's not going to be beneficial to anybody. Number 4, determine how much money you're entitled to. We really love this one.
Yeah, absolutely. It plays right into the MDS financial portrait. It's really critical that you know what makes up your marital estate, right? So people often do these premature negotiations and they just settle because it's easier. Like, I want the house because I want my kids to stay there. I maintain the home. I decorate the home. I want that. And your spouse is saying, yes, you could, I want you to stay in the house with the kids and so forth. But what you're not realizing, you're negotiating away other assets. You may be left with no retirement. You might be left with no cash. So you're house poor. I'm sure you heard that word before. So you really want to determine everything that you have in your assets and your debts. What is your income? What is your debts? And then when you do that, the considerations will lead you to what type of an attorney you need, or if you're even a candidate to go to mediation.
I love that. And, the line, determine how much money you're entitled to, almost seems like you could just go Google it. Well, it's not something you can Google. It really is a process that, really needs to be done because during that process, you're educated, you understand the financial impact, and you understand what all of this will mean to you as you move forward.
Do you mind if I do a little shift from that entitled word? Because that entitled word gets a lot of people up in arms,
Well,
right?
yeah, yeah.
I'm entitled to this, which brings me to the whole emotional part. You mentioned your spouse that might have an affair, right? Okay, so now you're entitled to more because that happened. It's not really how the court looks at it, but that's how your feelings are. Or you're entitled to this because you gave up your career, and you raised the kids. So now you're entitled to this or that. Or your spouse isn't feels like they're entitled to their pension because they work there. It's not at MDS, it's not entitlement. Our portrait does not go through and tell you what you're entitled to, but it will go through so you understand what's rightfully yours. And rightfully yours can just give you a mind shift because you don't feel greedy now. You don't feel like you're going after something that you feel guilty about. But if it's rightfully yours and you decide to negotiate it away, okay, but you're doing that with financial clarity. You're not entitled to it, but it's rightfully yours.
Good point. I like that a lot. Number 5, protect your savings. So the article is really on point when it says your cash can be consumed quickly in a divorce. We 100% agree with that. We see it happen often because people spend money in the beginning without understanding what that means, right? And without the financial planning for that. It also says safeguard your joint assets by asking your financial institutions to require two signatures for withdrawals. I don't know about that.
Yeah. I think there's a little confusion between this one, although they were going down the right track with this thought process. It's a little confusing to this and number 3 with closing your joint accounts, right? So I don't see how a financial advisor is going to be able to have you get dual signatures if you're not communicating with your spouse. I mean, I don't know if spouse is just going to agree to go do the dual signatures, right? But what we had is, as a matter of fact, if I can share a story, a client who wanted an account, actually this scenario, and the financial advisor said, "Oh, well, we need both signatures." Spouse refused. But then we went back because with us it's all about knowledge and asking the right questions, and we went back and we advised her to ask the planners, or I don't even know if we got on with them at that point, but we said, what about asking the parties to split the account equally in two, because she was moving out and she needed access to some money and they did not have a support order in place yet. And so husband did agree to that. So they did do an advance to equitable distribution, and they did separate the account with a transfer of shares in kind. So it was equally mirrored as two different accounts that they each had access to. And then their attorneys are just tracking that those are monies that they already took advances to.
That's good. We do agree that you should immediately obtain statements for all cash accounts, checking accounts, savings account, portfolio, brokerage, any accounts that you have access to, get the statements immediately because invariably money can start moving around, distrust, vulnerability can start to set in. And if you have those statements as soon as possible, they will be very valuable to you as you prepare moving forward.
And in addition, you should open a credit card in your name only if you do not have one, because there's so many times that people are shut off their credit cards and they do run through that cash. And now what, right? So if you don't have a credit card in your name only, I would suggest that you open one.
True. Yeah. And again, where you're not an authorized user, where you are the owner, it makes a difference. Number 6, keep things as friendly as possible. Yes, we agree.
Yeah. So number 6, again, we agree with that concept, but it doesn't go with the other numbers like closed joint accounts, right? So you're not going to keep things friendly if you go do these things with your spouse behind your spouse's back, right? So, but again, it bodes to in the beginning, if you hire an attorney at number 1, and your spouse is blindsided by that, or even if your spouse knows it's coming and you never gave the spouse the opportunity to disappoint you by not giving you documents, give them the opportunity first, right? Because then they're going to get this language. Attorneys only have certain language they can use. And if you get served, it doesn't sound nice. You're getting sued for this, you're getting sued for that. It's the language they have to use. So you can't blame the attorney there. But if you send that too quickly, you're not going to be getting along too well, right? So think about how you're going to let your spouse know if you haven't let your spouse know, or think about the next step you're going to take if your spouse does know. And the next step could be, let's try to gather this information together because it'll save us both a lot of money, rather than, okay, I'm going to have you served and now the clock is ticking. And I think you talked about that a little bit before, Karen. Then you have all these deadlines to meet and everybody's under the gun.
So true. And in other scenarios, conversely, if your spouse asks for a divorce, you could be the one reeling in emotion and anger and panic. So it's really not the time to be in that place specifically. It is the time to financially prepare and deal with your emotions alongside of that. But if you start being aggressive and reactive, you're not going to get the documents you need to be financially clear, or you will eventually get them, but you will spend a lot of money getting them. So if your spouse wants a divorce, you should ask for the financial documents if you don't have access to them that support your marital estate.
Yeah.
And of course, get counseling.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned that because keeping friendly sometimes, my mom always taught me, pick your battle, Catherine, right? So there's a lot of things to argue about in divorce, but what's the most important thing there? And kind of keep in that zone, right? Don't argue about everything because it's not going to stay friendly at all. But bite your tongue and get a divorce coach or go to your therapist and vent to them, like let it all out with them so that you do not have so much of that frustration or overwhelm taken out on your spouse when it's just going to cost you money and make things harder.
It's not easier, way easier said than done, but we've been there, done that. And so, we
Mhm.
we understand what you're faced with. Number 7, talk with your children. We agree that this is a really, really important step and probably not number 7, but let's talk about that, Catherine.
Yeah, the most important and probably the hardest thing is to be on the same page of what you're going to tell them and how you're going to tell them and when you're going to tell them. Sometimes one spouse just blurts it out to the child and the other spouse wasn't prepared. Or, oh my gosh, do you remember the time that a mom was messaging us? She was preparing for divorce. She knew it was happening. He actually was having an affair. And now with all the shared services that we have on, I don't know the technical words, shared services on your iPads, their child was on his iPad and saw the communication that way, which I was mortified about that. But you don't want your children finding out like that. And remember, they hear you on the phone. When you tell your friends who are now telling somebody else, even though you trust they're not telling somebody else, they overhear their parents talking. So I do agree with being ahead of that, if you can, and just be mindful of what you're saying to them. And maybe you do have to work with a therapist for the right language there. That's not what we do here, but try to be on the same page there so it benefits your kids and who are the most important thing of this whole process.
First and foremost, please do not use them as pawns. They easily can get in that space. They're not your best friend. They're not people that you tell, unload your frustration about your spouse. At the end of the day, you're their parent and they need that from you. So we do, in a financial space, we do recommend that you try to set parenting plans before negotiating financial settlements.
So thank you for joining us on this episode of 7 Things to Do ASAP when your spouse wants a divorce. We thank the writers of that article because it does bring a lot of attention to important things to do if you're going through this process. So stay tuned for future episodes as we continue to unravel the fascinating world of finance and divorce. Remember, knowledge is power.
Disclaimer. The information provided in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered as financial or legal advice. Please consult with professionals in the relevant fields for personalized guidance.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of We Chat Divorce. We hope this episode was informative and supportive on your divorce journey. If you're looking for more support for navigating divorce with confidence and clarity, head over to mydivorcesolution.com for more podcast episodes, divorce events, and resources for your divorce. We'll see you back here for our next episode.